Omar Mohammed Rizak, prisoner number 202-67016. Another in a long list of terrorists that were housed at USP Marion. I was a guard there for 23 years. This guy's just a small part of my story. You might think that watching terrorists would be a high-risk, nerve-wracking job. You'd be wrong. Most of the terrorists I've met I would classify as pussies. For the most part, they're weak. They do not get along well in prison because they're used to getting their way. It's a misconception that these people are oppressed and poor. The exact opposite is usually true. Most have an average education and come from the upper half of the economic strata of where they're from. They're terrorists because they feel that they deserve more than everybody else. I base these conclusions on my personal observations of them. All the terror prisoners who were born outside the U.S. fall into this broad category with a single exception. On the evening of November 23rd, 1985, Rizak boarded Air Egypt Flight 648 in Athens, Greece. He was accompanied by two other hijackers, Salem, who was leader of the operation, and another guy whose name isn't known. Shortly after the plane took off, the three produced weapons, announced that they were seizing the plane, and demanded that the captain fly it to Malta. A gun battle started between the hijackers and a single Egyptian air marshal. During the shootout, Salam, the leader, was killed and the air marshal was wounded. Rizak then took charge of the hijacking. After the plane arrived in Malta, he separated the Israeli and American passengers from the rest of them and moved them to the front of the plane. He released a number of Egyptian and Filipino passengers as well as two wounded flight attendants. Then he demanded that the aircraft be refueled, and when the authorities in Malta refused, he announced that he would shoot a passenger for every 15 minutes that his demands weren't met. Rizak did what he said he would. He first shot an Israeli woman, Tamar Artizi. He shot her twice, once in the head and once in the back. And then he threw her body from the plane. She survived by playing dead and then sneaking away when nobody was looking. 15 minutes later, he shot another Jew, a lady by the name of Mendelssohn. She was an Israeli citizen as well. Miss Mendelssohn died. Rizak then shot Patrick Baker, an American, but only succeeded in grazing his head. 2 or 3 hours later, Rizak shot Scarlett Rogenkamp in the face, killing her. She was in the U.S. Air Force. Later, he shot Jackie Flug, an American woman, in the head, and she lived by pretending to be dead after he threw her out of the plane. She's severely disabled by the injuries she received from the bullet in the head and will fall from the plane's front door to the concrete runway below. Next time you're boarding a plane, look down and imagine what it'd be like to fall that far with a bullet in your head. That's what happened to Ms. Flug. The United States government asked Egypt for permission to send in the elite U.S. Army Delta Force to free the hostages on the plane. There was 98 passengers and crew, and the Delta Force trains to take down terrorists on planes while not killing the hostages. The Egyptians said they didn't want foreign troops on their territory. They had their own elite special forces that could handle the situation. The next day, Egyptian special forces stormed the plane. The operation was a total cluster executed by piss-poor excuses for soldiers. The idiots fired indiscriminately and set off a bomb of some kind. As a result, the aircraft burst into flames. 57 passengers were killed, as was the no-name hijacker. Rizak was injured in the attack. He was taken along with the surviving passengers to a hospital. The Egyptian soldiers thought he was just another passenger. At the hospital, Rizak was pointed out by the hijacker as a hijacker by some crew members and other passengers. The authorities in Malta charged Rizak with murder, attempted murder, and hostage taking. He pled guilty and was sentenced to 25 years imprisonment. Libya put pressure on the Maltese authorities, so they released him after some like 7 years later in February of 1993, and they allowed him to aboard a plane to Ghana in Africa. Rizak's itinerary was to carry him from there to Nigeria and then to Ethiopia and finally the Sudan. Ghanaian officials detained Rizak for several months but eventually allowed him to proceed to Nigeria. When he finally got to Nigeria, the authorities there turned him over to the FBI and they arrested him. He was put on a private plane filled with FBI agents, a doctor, and an interpreter. Next stop, USA and American justice system. Rizak was indicted and tried for air piracy in the district court for the District of Columbia. At trial, he said he was not guilty by reason of insanity. My favorite defense was the same one the Nazis used at Nuremberg. He said, "I did it, but others told me to." He claimed to be just following orders like a good Nazi soldier would. In support of his insanity defense, Rizak presented evidence that he suffered from PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder. As witnesses, he called several members of his own family and these 3 psychiatric experts. Rizak testified in his own defense. Rizak asserted that his PTSD sprang from numerous traumatic events he had experienced. First in the Jordanian refugee camp, in which he spent a lot of his youth, and later in Lebanon, where he was active in the Palestinian Revolutionary Organization, or PLO, from 78 to 85. The Lebanese experience he described included witnessing the killing of hundreds of refugees by Israeli forces in Beirut in 1982. He witnessed the killings in populations of entire villages and nearly being killed himself in a car bomb. Rizak's family testified that when he left Jordan, he was a normal, friendly, and extroverted. Yeah, everybody leaves their home and goes to a war zone to fight with a terrorist organization, right? But, when he returned from Lebanon, he was pale, inattentive, prone to nightmares, antisocial, and had lost his sense of humor. Yeah, I bet he had a sense of humor. Rizak's psychiatric expert said that these changes in behavior were symptomatic of PTSD, and based their examination of Rizak on the testimony of him and other witnesses. And they concluded that he was suffering from PTSD when he committed the hijacking in November of '85. The United States presented 2 witnesses, psychiatric expert witnesses of their own, and they basically said that it didn't matter if he had PTSD because he knew right from wrong, and he wasn't legally insane when he shot 5 people. Rizak said that the district court should not have mentioned that 57 passengers died when the Egyptian Special Forces attacked the plane in a bungled attempt at rescue, since he'd only shot 5 people in the head. For causing the death of 57 people, Rizak is serving a life sentence, but he can be paroled in 2023 if the U.S. Parole Commission decides to. The court made a non-binding request that he not be paroled. These days, Rizak spends his days reading and trying to convert others to his radical form of Islam. He has a particularly strong attachment to violent rhetoric. Let's say that word right, rhetoric. He believes that he and others will convert all Americans to his brand of Islam. He didn't say it to me, but I took it that he meant that what he was really getting at was that all the Americans would be his brand of Islam because they'd be the only ones left alive after all the killing was done. He claims to be a prisoner of war, or a political prisoner, depends on how he feels that day. I've known several people with PTSD, and this guy doesn't show any symptoms of it. I think it was just another excuse to try to get out of paying for his crimes. He whines every time his cell is searched, and I once spent 4 hours looking through every single sheet of paper and inside everything in his cell. I even changed his mattress to deny him the ability to hide things in it. The whole time he paced back and forth and told me dozens of times, "I feel sorry for you. because you have nothing to do but search me. I told him I'd continue to search him and everybody in the cell block all day, every day. He complained I was the only one that did that. I told him that I must be the only one that did the job right. He complained to the warden, the shift lieutenant, the SIS, and anybody else that he could that would listen to him that I was picking on him. All it did was tell him I was doing my job. I'd have been shocked if they told me to stop looking for contraband. What the idiot didn't understand was that the more prisoners cry, about being searched, the more I search them. It makes me think they must be hiding something if they make a big deal out of my inspecting their property. Sometimes it's true, and sometimes I find that, they really were trying to hide something from me. And sometimes it's just a crybaby thing, and he thinks that he has the right to privacy in prison. Since he's a pain in the ass, I never tell him what I took or why. He's fond of filing complaints, so let him file a complaint. And let him compel me to tell him what I took and why. The game goes on. If you like this video, hit the like button down there, will you? And I promise, it won't kill you to subscribe.